Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Misty.
Thank you, Mary. I am Misty Sheehan, and I'm a member of the Sunday Services Committee. We would like to welcome you all to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Grand Traverse. You are welcome, regardless of your religious affiliation, your sexual orientation, the color of your skin, or whether you are indigenous or not. You are even welcome back if you've been gone. We ask that you have curiosity about the world around us, that you love, and that you want to make the world a better place. Do we have any visitors today? If you are a visitor, could you rise and introduce yourself? Okay. Welcome. Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, my name's Mark. I'm back for the first time in a long time, so it's nice to be back. I haven't been here since Hava was where you're standing, so it's been a minute. And this is my fiancée, Veronica.
Okay.
It's her first time, not mine.
Yeah. Welcome back. Thank you. Anybody else? No. Okay. Over to your left, there's a book for you to write your joys and concerns and light a candle. Please go over during the prelude or at any time and write them down so we can share them with the congregation later. Now, turn off your electronic devices and we will begin. So I would like to invite Dusty Colton to come forward to offer us a brief annual budget drive update.
I'm Dusty Colton, treasurer. Here's my water for my froggy voice. We're about halfway through our annual budget drive, is what we call it these now. We're rising with abundance, pledging with our hearts. Pledging with our hearts. What is this, you ask? I'm sure you ask.
What is that?
It is, thank you. It is three things. First, it's my pledge, right out of the UUCG office file. You see, I don't like shiny paper that smells of chemicals. You must think, you probably suspect I'm not too fond of computer screens. Give me paper that has been folded, torn, smells of coffee stains, dotted with drips of sweat, scratch out words and emotions, crumpled paper that has soul in it. Second, this represents a scarred heart. Not from cholesterol, but scratches of vulnerability. It's a heart of compassion. This is how a soul heart looks after loving, suffering loss, grieving amidst time of joy, experiencing the pain of those who are treated unjustly, committed to learning about and loving the world, being quiet to be able to listen with hearing and acceptance of the other. Third, this is UUCGT, a place where folks are brave enough to bring these scarred hearts into a community where souls matter. We share our experiences and love of life. We learn together, grieve together, support each other, seeing how we can scar our hearts a little more. We have received pledges of $104,410 from 35 pledges. Now I want you to cogitate a bit. Halfway is %50 of our drive time. And this sum for 35 pledges is generous and fine. But it's only 38% of our $270,000 goal that were we to attain, we'd be made whole. The number of pledges, only %32 of what we got nigh on a year ago. This is still a little too few. Must we be slow? Let's not fiddle, dither about, and speak in a riddle. Crumple up your heart. Let your pledge flow. Thank you all for all your gifts, but please grab a pledge form, crumple it up, hold it next to your heart for a while, then open it up, put down your pledge, and send it in. And yes, that's my pledge sheet.
Whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here this morning. Are your wireless on? Oh, holding me accountable. Well, that would be why you couldn't hear me. There we go. Well, let's try that again. Whoever you are and wherever you are in life's journey, even if you're not turned on yet, you are welcome here. I'm Reverend Alex. I'm the minister here at UUCGT. I use he and him pronouns, and I welcome you to this month of vulnerability. Don't you all run away at once. We'll be exploring this topic from Soul Matters of Vulnerability for the next few services, especially in today's service on the radical power of vulnerability and how this helps us to connect and belong with one another. So as we settle in together, I invite you to hear these opening words from the Reverend Sarah C. Stewart. Bring who you are as you enter our church this morning. Bring your best self and your struggling self. Bring your mistakes and your triumphs. Bring your shortcomings and your recommitment to do good. Bring yourself here and open your heart to beauty, to truth, to the door that is open to the presence of God. Here in this church, we are trying to walk together on the peaceable way, trying to hammer out division and hatred and all that separates one from another. We try and we will fall short, but held in love, we try again. We come together this morning as a church to bow our heads in prayer, to raise our voices in song, to remember our promises and vow to live by them once again. And so in this spirit, I say to all of us, come, let us worship together. We light our chalice this morning, as we do each Sunday, in honor of the dignity and worth that we believe is present in each and every person. Faithful Ellie here will help light the chalice, and I will read these words from the Reverend Scott Taylor. We light this chalice for those who convinced us that it was safe to share our longings, for those who proved that not everyone will run from the weight of the pain we carry, for those who held us in our fear and helped us heal from our regret, for those whose humble apologies made us believe that we too could be forgiven, and for those whose tenderness helped us see that we no longer need to hide. Our vulnerability frees us, it binds us, it makes holy the path we travel together. And so may this flame ever help us keep that in view. And now we'll go to our music director, Renee Russell, who will introduce our opening song.
Good morning, everyone. So I thought we'd try something a little different this morning. It's something I've done before with our vocal ensemble. And we're going to use our beautiful singing bowl to take us on a little bit of a journey inside, but also into a connection with one another. So when you listen to the bowl, if you listen carefully, you don't hear just one note. You can hear lots of tiny little notes. And for those who are involved with music, they're called harmonics, all these different little layers of frequencies that are together. And what's kind of moving about this beautiful bowl is that it can come in waves, and it can come within you, but it can also connect everyone around you. So when Reverend Alex said that this month was going to be about vulnerability, I immediately thought, well, the scariest thing to do is actually to hear your voice with no music behind it, and nothing to support it when it comes to music, is to kind of be on your own. But the important thing to remember with this, what we're about to do, is that you are not on your own. So I'm going to invite everyone, as you're comfortable, to close your eyes and to just center yourself and just take a nice breath. Breathe in. Just a nice sigh out. Just relaxing into your chair. A nice breath in and a breath out. Good. We'll do one more. Breath in and out. Just releasing. So what I'm going to start to do is to sound the bowl. And as you listen, just see what comes in, what frequencies you start to feel. And then, to really lean in a little bit into that vulnerability, I want you to use your voice. It can be a hum, it could be an ah, it could be an ooh, doesn't matter. Whatever feels really comfortable to you. And just go ahead and sing the frequencies that you're hearing. And the way we sing from a really comfortable place is a nice breath in. It's just an ah that comes out. It's nothing more complicated than that. It's just breath moving past your vocal cords, and there we have a sound. So let's follow the frequencies as best we can. We're going to weave together these beautiful sounds, and I'll just keep sounding it, and then I'll slowly bring us back into our breath. Here we go. So let's take one more breath in and go. Thank you very much.
We will now have a word from Ann Sweeney on her love of this place in support of the annual budget drive.
Hi, everybody. I knew that I'd been a member for a long time, and I was thinking it had been about 40 years. And then just last night, I found proof. I found a beacon from December 6, 1982, that said inside, it says that I signed the membership book on November 28, 1982. And at the bottom, some of you old people will recognize this name. It says, "So glad you have joined our fellowship," and it was signed by Ruth Gamble. So I figure I have a historic artifact here. anyway, it's all working out. So I'm calling this a review of my abundance from the UU. And you can't see this, my notes are all in bullet points. You know how sometimes having to do an assignment of some sort, say like speaking to a congregation, forces you to think about your life? My thinking for the past couple of weeks has been about the impact Unitarian Universalism, particularly as it's practiced in this congregation, has had on my life. As I look back over my history with Unitarian congregations, I realize my touch points with each of them is related to important bullet points in my own life history. It started when my husband and I were married in the Lansing Unitarian Church in 1966. That choice of churches was intended as kind of a compromise between his strong Catholic upbringing and my early interest in Eastern religions. Luckily, his parents got the word Unitarian confused with the concept of unity or people's church, and they were very accepting of the union and came to the wedding and all, so it worked out. So I was able to purposely keep vague about my personal religious beliefs. We didn't stay in Lansing long, so I never got very involved with that church. As with many young couples just starting their careers, we moved around the country a lot, and religion was not really a priority. Then in 1980, we moved to Traverse City with 3 kids in tow. My bullet point number 2 is a new job and how it led me to the Unitarian congregation here. A couple of years after we moved here, I got a job at the NMC library, and it was then I heard there was a small Unitarian group meeting on Sundays in the science building next door. So I ventured out to investigate it. I liked attending there, was appreciative, but didn't quite feel a part of it yet. The fellowship then was composed of a relatively small group of people. It was lay-led, and while the services were interesting, they seemed more like college lectures, especially since we were seated in the chem lab. However, about that time, I started thinking, as usually what happens once your kids come along, is that I needed to get them involved in some kind of religious education program soon. This lecture room at the college didn't seem quite apropos for their religious education. However, amazingly, that very next year, the congregation changed venues and started to meet in a really nice off-campus location on the corner of Washington and Rose Streets. So bullet point number 3 is, next thing I knew, I was bringing the kids along with me, where they'd go down to RE, similar to what we do here, only it was in the basement. It wasn't long before I was subbing for the RE classes. We all mostly enjoyed these times, especially the boys, as we'd always stop for fresh donuts on the way home. Also, one year, I especially remember, we were taking the older group of RE kids out to visit area churches. It was part of learning about other religions. And the high point for many of us was when we were all welcomed to a service at the local synagogue. And if you've never been there, what an amazing building and congregation. A few years later, I stepped up and became an official pledging member. It turns out it was like the next month, I guess. So bullet point number 4 is when our daughter announced she was getting married and wanted to marry right here in our UU building, with the Reverend Emmy Lou Belcher conducting the ceremony. I was thrilled. Once again, this church was playing a big part in a major bullet point of my life. Several years later, there was another engagement. My son and his fiancée wanted to be married here as well. I was flabbergasted, considering my daughter-in-law's to-be's family was active at Central United Methodist Church. The only change this young couple from what my daughter's wedding was besides the different vows, of course, is that they wanted the altar situated here, right here as it is now. They came in, I guess they came in that door. And our daughter had chosen to have the altar over there by those windows. How lucky was I to see my kids married right here in a place where I could feel good vibes all around us. So 20 years slipped by, life was good, kids moved away but kept close by, grandkids appeared. Sometimes they even attended services here with me. I served on the leadership development and endowment committees and greeted occasionally. Ministers came and went. My husband and I retired. Next thing I knew, another bullet point of life happened unexpectedly. Some of you may know that my husband Jerry passed away a little over a year ago. And who offered to give a blessing at Jerry's celebration of life picnic but retired UU minister Nancy Doty. The UUs had come through again for me. But wait, there's more. It's been very hard for me to be out in the world this year on my own after having a partner for close to 58 years. Being a part of this congregation has helped a lot. The first place I ventured out after his death was to our Christmas Eve service, and there I received some much-needed hugs, despite everyone being masked during the time of COVID. Now, one last bullet point, soul matters. This congregational initiative came at the exact perfect time when I needed it. I joined last fall with some trepidation. All that sharing and everything made me a little queasy, to tell you the truth. But I also knew it was just what I needed to help figure out who I was as a newly independent woman. Trying not to mention names, but Barb Termott is the perfect leader. And I was introduced to new friends who helped me redefine myself. Calling ourselves soul sisters makes it fun also. One thing I really love about UUs is that even though in many ways we are a like-minded people, that doesn't mean we all need to think alike or act alike the same to belong. How boring would that be? We are like-minded in the sense that we share each other's values. Pam Hendrick made some comments during the service on January 22nd that made me write cryptic notes on my order of service. Something to the effect that regardless of whether we attend here seeking the warmth of community or seeking truth in our faith, or I'd like to add seeking beautiful music, we can receive all these here in this congregation. That's why 40 years of our congregation giving support to me at times I was in need encouraged me to reciprocate by volunteering and providing financial support. This year, by reordering my priorities, I was able to increase my pledge. Turns out it's not just during those bullet point moments in life that we recognize the importance of having this church around. But think about how on a regular basis, this UU building, UUCGT building, an extraordinary minister and staff and musicians and Sunday services committee serve us with the music and messages they bring to us week after week. Now our job is to provide financial support so they can continue doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. That was a wonderful testimonial. Those of you who are interested in joining the annual budget drive, which I hope you all are, there's a welcome table out in the hallway for the annual budget drive packets and information about how to pledge. So make sure you get through there after the service. It's now time for our offering. We make our offering to our church, the church center that we enjoy, and to the people with less than ourselves. We now make our offering to a portion of the earth, which is our congregation and our wider community. The offering will now be collected with joy. Be assured that it will be spent with thoughtfulness and prayer. The baskets have one side for the church and the other for the community. You may also contribute in the following ways: by mailing in a check, visiting the UUCGT website, downloading the Banco mobile, and the Faith Engagement app. So, thank you.
Unfortunately, everyone, we had planned to welcome Reverend Wendy Von Quarter as a community minister for our congregation this Sunday, but she unfortunately had an emergency where she could not be here with us today. So I would invite you to hold her on your heart, and maybe one of these future weekends we'll hope to welcome her and bring her on board here and read our covenant together. But Wendy sends her best, and we send our best to Wendy in this time where she can't be with us. And so we'll go to this time in our service of sharing our joys and concerns. This is that time where we hold those pieces of our lives that are too great to hold on just our own. I'll be sharing those that have been offered up for us to hold on our hearts as we are gathered. If you have a joy or concern that's a bit too tender to share, you're always welcome to reach out to myself, to our wonderful congregational care team, or to simply light a candle at any point in our service if you'd like. Or to hold it on your heart as you were just held in the love that abides here. None of us is ever meant to travel life's journey alone. And so here is what has been offered up for us to hold as we are gathered. From Jan Zerbel, sadly, 2 of the brightest lights in my life are flickering. My best friend and sister of the heart, positive lover of life, Sharon, is in her final days after a valiant face down with ovarian cancer. I benefited from her loving support as my own funny, creative, compassionate son struggled with indomitable metastatic melanoma. I'm with him now as he lives out his life his way with hospice care. It is hard and painful to imagine the world without these 2 bright lights. I wonder, how will I find my way in the darkness? So we hold Jan on our hearts. From Barb Berry, a great joy. My step-grandson Isaac Gray was featured in Saturday's Record Eagle for performing CPR to save a woman's life at the airport where he was working. My daughter Jen and I are so proud of him. We appreciate Mary Kiner and UU volunteers for doing Tuesday lunch for over 30 years. Whoa. 30 years, that's a long time. And from Nick Jackson and family, sister and Aunt Marianne returns today after her winter escape. We're so glad to have her back with us. And now let us take a moment to pause and hold all of the joys and concerns that remain on our hearts. And as we pause now in this space, entering into our time for meditation and prayer, let's open up a space for some collective vulnerability together. Allowing ourselves to find our breath, to sink into this spacious time, to allow ourselves to bear our burdens here, to share our hearts with one another. What are you holding on your heart this morning? What piece of yours feels heavy to share? Feels scary or even frightening to bring before others? We all have parts of ourselves that we find hard to hold, some parts that we find even harder to share with others. Even the moments of our lives sometimes feel too great to carry on our own. There are times when we sometimes don't know where we can go or who we can even share our lives with. When even asking for what we need is sometimes hard to name. And so in this space, I invite you to put aside your shame, your hurts, your fears of being worthy of love, of compassion, of care. Put aside your guilt for reaching out or even not reaching out, for the times when you traveled this journey on your own. Find a word or a name for what you're feeling, for what you're holding on your heart in this space. There is so much power in naming what it is that we feel. Naming is the first part of making things talkable. And when you're ready, breathe in and breathe out. And take in all of the love that is all around us in this space. And join with us back in our room. This place is a community that was built with you in mind, and you never truly journey alone. We need one another. And so in this I say, may it be so, and amen. I'll now invite Misty to come forward to share our reading.
Alex found this reading called The Power of Vulnerability by Brené Brown. It's an excerpt from a TED Talk by vulnerability researcher Dr. Brené Brown on the power of being vulnerable. So this is what she writes. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you their most excruciating experiences about being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, stories they'll tell you are about disconnection. I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled connection in a way that I didn't understand and I had never seen. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is readily, easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people knew it or saw it, that I wouldn't be worthy of connection? These things that I can tell you about it, first of all, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human empathy or connection. No one wants to talk about it. The less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, was excruciating vulnerability. This idea for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, to be really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. So I could tell you a lot about shame. There's only one variable that separates people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it. The people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the only hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we are not worthy of connection. To let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen, to love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. To practice gratitude and joy in those moments of terror when we're worrying, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Just to be able to stop and instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm so grateful because to feel this vulnerable means that I'm alive. We need to believe that we are enough because when we work from a place that says, I'm enough, then we stop screaming and start listening. We're kinder and gentler to the people around us. And we're kinder and gentler to ourselves.
So I want to start this sermon off by telling you a part of myself that feels pretty vulnerable to talk about. I am really not that good at asking for help. Anybody else not really good at asking for help? I see some hands. For me, somewhere in my journey, I picked up the message that I had to be self-reliant, that the only person I should rely on is myself, and that I should do everything I can to make sure that I am not a burden on others. And while I'm aware of this tendency and pattern of mine to not want to reach out or ask for help, especially when I really need it, and even though I've done a lot of work on myself to really challenge or confront this, it's still something that I find that I wrestle with. And here's how that played out recently in a way that feels pretty embarrassing to admit. For a long time, for maybe about a whole year, I didn't have a lot of furniture in my house. I had a house that was probably about half empty. Yes, part of this was becoming a newly recovering graduate student, while also trying to furnish a full home for the first time. But underlying the issue was more than just the costs of furniture. In truth, I was ashamed of asking for help. I needed help, not just with picking up and moving things or with borrowing a truck to help with pieces and other aspects of it, but also with even just searching for furniture. And to be honest, all of that pressure, the overwhelm of feeling that I really needed to get on this, to find furniture that was affordable, sustainable, and could also be moved all by myself, that was pretty darn debilitating. And you can also imagine that I didn't actually get very far with that whole needing to do it all by myself piece. What big furniture is actually out there that one person can move on their own? I noticed myself avoiding this side of shame, of putting it off for later for the future Alex to deal with. And it wasn't until I had a partner move in with me, my partner Connor, that things changed. Trust me, he had had enough with staring at an empty living room. And as he lovingly, emphasis on lovingly, pushed me on some of my shame, heck, even arranging a whole pickup of what is now our dining room table with chairs and all, I learned a lot more about the vulnerability involved in a loving relationship. How he knew this was a real challenge for me with asking for help, and really proved to me that he was someone I could ask and rely on. That if I asked him for help, he would actually be there. That if I was going to be truly vulnerable in our relationship, I was going to need to learn to ask for help when I needed it. So I'm proud to report now that our house is full, a disclaimer that we absolutely do not need any of your old furniture or other pieces. Thanks, but no thanks. But this experience with confronting a real vulnerability of mine showed me just how hard being vulnerable can be at times. Even as someone whose work and life seems so steeped in vulnerability and having vulnerable conversations, I really thought I was a pro here. So beyond furniture and asking for help when we need it, we're delving into this wider theme of radical vulnerability, the ways that being vulnerable with one another and ourselves can be a truly radical act. Vulnerability itself is radical just in how it works. The root of the word vulnerable comes from the Latin word vulnerare, which actually means to wound. Vulnerability is our ability to open ourselves up to the possibility of being wounded. It's stepping into a situation or a conversation and sharing of yourself in a way that you might actually get hurt, that there's risk involved in vulnerability. The risk of what others might say or think, the risk of how we might hurt or feel, all of those complex mosaics of emotions that we might be trying to hide from within ourselves or avoid from feeling at all costs. Vulnerability is our ability to tolerate the potential for hurt and woundedness, and choosing to remain open to ourselves and to life even when we do get hurt. This is really hard stuff, folks, especially if we've known great pain in our lives to the point where we've vowed to never let ourselves hurt like that again. That we won't allow for opportunities like that to hurt us or wound us because we've been there before. To be vulnerable involves having a sense of faith and trust that our vulnerability is worth the wrestling. That our hurts and our pains actually show us more about ourselves more than they show us about others. Being open and vulnerable is so hard. Some of you may have read my Beacon article discussing the differences between being what's called vulnerable and being transparent. I think it's a conversation that's really helpful to thinking about what it takes to be vulnerable with one another. There are many ways that we can often be transparent, where we can allow others to see into ourselves and our inner workings, and also not feel vulnerable. It's challenging because transparency can sometimes look a lot like vulnerability. But the difference is in the core aspect of what it takes to be vulnerable, that capacity of ours to be possibly hurt or wounded. When we're transparent, we're sharing of ourselves from a place of safety, perhaps even a place of comfort. We're showing people parts of our story that we've examined before, that we already know how to talk about, or probably already have a pretty good handle on. Perhaps we've already told our story many times over, the pieces of pain or challenge in our past that have left scars but have already healed over. Instead, vulnerability asks us to share from our wounds, not from our scars. It's a deeper sharing of ourselves that taps into the hurt, pain, and risk that we're too often afraid to share with others, that we're too often afraid to face ourselves. So one can be transparent. One can talk about their past, can even show parts of who they are that have healed, that are even remarkable about who they are. But it's not vulnerability if there's no risk of hurt. Being vulnerable means we will possibly get hurt, and that is frightening. I want to turn to Dr. Brené Brown and her words for us on the power of vulnerability and how vulnerability itself is at the center of our meaningful human experiences. In our reading, she discusses the disconnective power that shame has over our lives, how what's really behind the shame is this idea of, I'm not good enough. That vulnerability itself is painful and excruciating. She writes, in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. We have to confront our fear that we are not worthy of connection. When we are vulnerable, we are choosing to confront those inside voices that tell us it is not safe for us to be ourselves. That if we really let people in, we're going to be in for a world of hurt to follow. When we flip that narrative, when we face those loud and powerful voices inside ourselves that say, it's not safe, what will they really think, or I really just can't do that, we're opening ourselves up to liberation. We're opening our hearts to be truly compassionate and unfettered, and we make space for others to also do the same. In my case, in flipping the narrative that I really could ask for help, that I wouldn't be a burden, that I didn't have to do it all on my own, I found a deeper way into my own relationship. I even surprised myself with the ways in which I had already thought I was a pro at being vulnerable. It turns out I've still got a lot to learn there. What I found was that this vulnerability, even if it was scary or hard in the moment, it ultimately led to greater connection and love. What was this thing that I was so afraid of didn't have to be this unnamed shame and pain that I felt around asking for help. Instead, I could own my story and own my vulnerability and remember in the end that I was still worthy. In talking about vulnerability, there are times when it might not be safe or even okay to be vulnerable. There are some connections and relationships of ours that are not vulnerable. For example, the relationships between doctors and patients or lawyers and clients. There may be an appropriate level of transparency there, but not a mutual sense of vulnerability. There are also times in our lives when others attempt to use or even abuse our empathy and our kindness. How some might take advantage of us opening up about our wounds and our hurts to stock up on painful words or ammunition for the future. When others manipulate and hurt us, it can be vulnerable to really name and hold to our boundaries what we will and will not accept about how we are treated. Despite this, I'd argue that being vulnerable is still the surprising position of power in the room. When we own our stories and recognize our wounds and our hurts, we take the power away from people to hurt us. When we name or call out that thing that we're too afraid people might see, we take back the power that we've given to fear. So there may be times when being vulnerable isn't the best solution, when it may even cause harm. And yet vulnerability demands that we participate in it, even given these risks and possible hurts. By doing so, we actually leave the situation or conversation as the person with more power. We've owned that chapter of our story and that experience to the point where we get to share and decide how the narrative is shared. There is so much power in being truly vulnerable. I want you to think about a concept that Dr. Brown names as being wholehearted. She names us as the kinds of people who don't shy away from vulnerability, who aren't afraid to dive headfirst into discomfort and shame. Some pretty interesting people, right? Being wholehearted means telling our story with our whole heart, having the courage to be messy and imperfect, and allowing others to see us exactly as we are. Being wholehearted means having compassion for ourselves and for others, and it's about being willing to let go of who we think we should be and embracing who it is that we actually are. Vulnerability allows us to find connection, especially with the parts of ourselves that we're too often afraid to show. We need to be willing to be vulnerable with one another, to be open even when there's no guarantee. To be the ones to say, "I love you" first, or to ask for help or to say what we need, even when it's hard or challenging, or even when we're not quite sure how it will be received. We need to move past our shame and our fear of disconnection and move to a place that calls us into leading with our whole hearts. That's what being part of a spiritual community calls us to do together. So to close, I want to invite you to bring your full self here. I want to invite you to go beyond the surface with this community, to go into that risky territory of even getting a little bit vulnerable. We have a faith here that teaches us that each one of us is loved and is worthy of connection and belonging, no matter who it is we are or what our story has been. There is no place for fear at this table over whether we'll be loved or fully accepted. The answer is yes, you can bring your full self here. Let yourself see and be seen. Let yourself know and be known. Open your heart to feeling all of it. None of us can go beyond the surface, can go beyond being transparent with one another, if we aren't willing to take a risk on the path of more fully loving ourselves and our neighbors. We have to be brave to be real and authentic, and we need to open to our woundedness as a people. Above all, your fragile and wounded and hurting self is welcome here. And together, we can make a space for those who most desperately need a community of love, connection, and belonging, just like this one. And so, friends, let us endeavor to make that space together. May it be so, and amen.
I will now extinguish the chalice. And being as it's March, and being as I'm Irish, I want to use an Irish blessing. May the road rise to greet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rains fall soft on your fields.
I'll put the Trek chalice away for next Sunday. And so, in the spirit of covenant, community, and commitment, in the spirit of vulnerability and being real with one another, may we be made ready to serve one another and to create the world that we so desperately dream of. Go in peace all, may it be so, and amen. And I have just a couple of really quick announcements before you all head out. We're doing a tabling at the library with the Polestar LGBTQ Resource Center next Saturday. That'll be Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we need volunteers to help staff our table. This is a resource fair for LGBTQ plus youth. And we'd love to show up as a faith community that is there and affirms. And so if you wouldn't mind checking your flash links for that link to sign up and help out with that. And then we have a new members service coming up on March 19th. So please let us know if anybody is interested in becoming a new member. You can reach out to myself or to Chris Lautz. And please think about filling out one of those green sheets, those welcome sheets, and that way we can kind of start the conversation with you. So anyway, our service is now at an end. Go in peace and grow in love.